Hello, and welcome to this edition of Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Eric Friedman. I am the Assistant Executive Director for Public Affairs at the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The CFB is the nonpartisan independent city agency that empowers New Yorkers to make a greater impact on their elections. We run a citywide voter education campaign through our NYC Votes initiative. As part of that work, we sponsor candidate debates, we publish the voter guide, and we're conducting a citywide campaign to help New Yorkers prepare for ranked choice voting. So for information on any of these efforts, please check out our website at www.voting.nyc. But today I'm here to talk about the other main part of our work, and that's administering the city's matching funds program for city elections. And I'm really lucky to have two really wonderful guests here to help me do it. So first, Chisun Lee is the Deputy Director of the Brennan Center's Election Reform Program, where she works to advance money and politics reform and improve election administration. She's been fighting the good fight in Albany on these issues. She's a student of the program we have here in New York City, and I'm really pleased she's able to join us. Rachael Fauss is the Senior Research Analyst for Reinvent Albany. She's long experience in public policy analysis and good government issues at both the state and city level. She's previously worked at the State Assembly and for the Citizens Union, and it's really great to have her here for this discussion as well. Before I turn to my esteemed guests, I want to set things up with a brief description of the unique system we have for financing campaigns here in New York City. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it works and talk about how the role it's playing in this absolutely critical election we're having this year. So since 1989, New York City's matching funds program has helped candidates run for city office. Over the past 20 years, the program has grown to be the most inclusive and expansive program of its kind anywhere in the nation at any level of government, helping ambitious New Yorkers seeking to improve their communities and run for office by matching the small dollar contributions they raise from city residents with public dollars. Those funds provide the ability for candidates to communicate their ideas to voters without having to depend on private wealth or special interest funding. They can run and compete with anyone by raising small contributions from their neighbors. So with that, I'm going to tell you a few quick things that you need to know about how the program works for this election year. So first, changes approved by the voters in 2018 increased that matching rate to 8-to-1, which makes a modest $20 contribution worth a total of $180 to a participating candidate. Once candidates meet a basic fundraising threshold and show they've got enough support to qualify, for candidates for city council and borough president, the program will match the first $175 in contributions from New Yorkers. For candidates running for mayor or for other citywide offices, the city matches the first $250. The changes approved by the voters and subsequently tweaked by the city council also dramatically increased the total amount of funds available to candidates, which means they can run strong campaigns exclusively on small dollar contributions and public funds, instead of being forced to rely on wealthy individuals, special interests, party organizations, and the like. For mayor, candidates can earn up to $6.5 million in public matching funds. Candidates for council can receive up to about $170,000. The third change approved by the voters was to cut the limit on individual contributions by more than half. So in the last election back in 2017, the largest contribution allowed to mayoral candidates was $5,100. For participants in the matching funds program this year, the largest contribution is now $2,000. For city council, it went from $2,850 to $1,000. This really limits the impact of the largest contributions and amplifies the impact of those small dollar grassroots fundraising that we're encouraging candidates to do. So this is an election that has long been promised to be wide open. We're electing a new mayor, a new city controller. Much of the city council is term limited out, and all of this obviously is coming at a critical moment in our city's history, as voters prepare to choose who will lead New York City out of this dramatic year and into the future. So the end result, we've got an explosion of democracy happening. We've got a record number of candidates running for office. We've got record-breaking numbers in our matching fund system. This analysis by the city of New York showed that the number of people donating less than $100 to a campaign has tripled since the last time the mayoralty was open in 2013, which outpaces the overall growth in the number of donors overall. So those donors come from all over the city. You can see here some maps that are available on our website that show contribution activity in practically every neighborhood, prepared by our friends at the Center for Urban Research at the CUNY Graduate Center. So all of this gives voters an incredible range of choices. We've got 7 candidates for mayor receiving $32 million in matching funds. We've paid out nearly $96 million in total. And candidates have one more opportunity to receive matching funds coming up next week. So with that, I'm going to again say I'm really pleased to have Chisun and Rachael here to help us talk through how the program works and why it improves democracy here in New York, and really better understand what New Yorkers are getting for their investment in the political process. So Chisun, I want to start with you. This is such a critical moment. The next mayor and the next city council are going to have to grapple with some incredibly serious issues: recovering from the pandemic, public safety, crime and policing, the future of education in the city. Can you talk a little bit about why public financing is so important for the future of our city?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on. And I think it's important to start with saying the Brennan Center works on democracy reform nationwide. And when we look to solution for the enormous problem of money in politics that's all over the country, we look to New York City, which has really been the pioneer of the small donor matching funds public financing program that, under the current Supreme Court, is the best tool that we citizens have to amplify our voices in the face of mega donors who are able to donate and spend without limit under the current Supreme Court. And New York City is the model, having a system that goes back decades. And as you've explained, built on it, improved, expanded, heard from voters what they want to see improved and expanded. It's a real model that has proliferated across the country for the state and in other jurisdictions, and it's growing. And we know there's a federal bill right now that in many ways models what has worked for New York City. And why is it important to New York City voters right now? We're coming out of an enormous pandemic crisis, a crisis across many areas: housing, education, healthcare, working. And this is the best system that we have for having regular voters who do not have hundreds of millions to give to get together, organize, amplify our voices, support candidates who best represent our communities, and past election day continue to have influence and have a seat at the table as these policies get decided.
I'll build on that for a second. So Rachael, why does it matter, right, at the end of the day, how campaigns are funded? Voters right now have so much information coming at them from candidates about their plans for the city and their ideas. What can we learn about the candidates from knowing where their support comes from, how they're funded, and who's donating to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my organization, Reinvent Albany, we're a watchdog group, and we try to ensure that our elected officials are making decisions that make sense for their constituents. And in order to understand how the decisions are made, you have to look at where the elected officials get their support. And that comes from the campaign contributions very often. By looking at those tools that you showed on the CFB's website, to look at where are the campaign contributions coming from? Are they getting them from small donors? Are they getting them with people who do business with the city? Are they getting the contributions from lobbyists? And then I think you can start to piece together, how the decisions are being made, and there's more transparency. And I think the tools on the CFB's website that go into the donations, who's contributing, let advocates like me take a deep dive into the numbers and help get the information out to the public. It helps the journalists get independent information out there. So we're not just hearing from the candidates, but we can see for ourselves who the supporters of these candidates are.
Again, that website, www.nyccfb.info. So Chisun, how does public financing help our government better reflect the diversity and interests of New Yorkers in every neighborhood?
We've done a lot of research about this, partly in New York City and then also in other places that have built on New York City's matching funds model. And public financing, we found, has three really enormous benefits for voters and for the political process overall. It boosts civic engagement. Where there's a matching funds program, you see more voters participating, not just on the one day they cast their ballot, but participating in small dollars to back candidates who might otherwise not be able to run at all and represent that voice. So civic engagement goes up. We see numbers of donors climbing under matching funds compared to a strictly private financing system. You also see barriers coming down to candidates who don't have access to networks of wealth because of historical and structural barriers in this country. So we're talking about women and people of color coming especially from communities that don't historically have access to private wealth, being able to run and get viewpoints out there that might otherwise not be heard. And then we see an amplification of a diversity of voices at that policymaking table, where elected officials know that they got there in part because of the support of their own constituents. And we've seen that campaigns, whether it's incumbents or challengers who rely on a public matching funds program, get a lot more support and interaction with their own constituents in their own districts than candidates who don't run on public financing. And all of this boosting people's engagement and feeling of ownership in their political process, and incentivizing elected officials to think about whose support they want to rely on, not just with a vote, but also in the dollars it does take to run a campaign. All of this is an enormous benefit compared to the system we would have otherwise, which is private financing in a world of super PACs.
I mean, it's a really good point. You know, in these open races, and there are a lot of those this year. You know, we're seeing more candidates, more voices, and that huge number of candidates is spending their time reaching out to more and more contributors. But it also works for incumbents, right? It makes folks get back and campaign and stay in touch with their communities in a way that that in a private funded system might not be happening. So Rachel, let me ask you, the matching fund system does create this level of accountability for candidates that isn't necessarily there in those systems that are 100% private funded, right?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, in New York City right now, there are some races where, you know, yes, we have term limits in New York City, and that creates certain interesting dynamics. But, you know, you have races where people with big name recognition nonetheless still are running. Former elected officials may be coming from a state office who are now running for city council. And the way for people to be able to compete against them, those people with name recognition, is to get their names out there themselves. And if they don't have those platforms from state offices, for example, the way to do that is through the public match. And I think it allows the small donations to be amplified, and for those candidates who wouldn't otherwise have a platform to have it. And, you know, in addition to the public match, I think, you know, for the citywide races, the fact that the New York City program has a debate program means that you also get more people out there who maybe not, you know, at the number 1 or 2 in the polls, but nonetheless get to have their voice heard.
That's right. Thank you. So I want to touch on a subject that Chisun brought up briefly, and that is something else new we have in this year's election is the level of independent spending, particularly in the mayor's race, which is something really new in New York City elections. So most of the major contenders for mayor this year have a so-called super PAC effort, running ads and sending out mailings alongside their own campaigns, to the tune of almost $17 million so far, with more sure to come in these closing week and a half or so, really. It isn't quite as much as the public funds, but it's important to look out for what's happening here. As the program for candidates has changed to really put a strong emphasis on small dollar fundraising and matching funds, the impact of unlimited money in New York City elections is growing as well. The good news is that New York City has some of the strongest disclosure requirements for outside spending anywhere in the nation. You know, and Rachel mentioned this earlier, not only can you find complete records of all the money raised and spent by the candidates on our website as disclosed by the campaigns, we also have detailed disclosures from the super PACs that are operating in city elections, including a visual search so that voters can find out who exactly is responsible for the ad they just saw or the mailer that just landed in their mailbox. Information available also includes detailed records on each individual funder, so you can really dive deep and peel back the layers of the onion to see where this outside money is coming from. Every communication by law that goes to the voters gets a disclaimer on it as well, listing not only the source of the ad, but the top 3 funders and where you can go to find more information. So we've got more outside money coming into our elections, which we can see it pretty clearly. So Rachael, why should we be concerned about these super PACs? Again, you've got candidates, they're asking voters to listen to their ideas, and they're saying that voters aren't concerned about who their supporters are. Or alternately, because they can't control what the supporters do, these super PAC efforts aren't going to change the way that they do their jobs once they get into office. What can we learn about the candidates by looking at who's supporting them outside the system?
I think that, the super PAC information that the Campaign Finance Board requires and the law requires helps us get to that answer of who are the people behind the super PACs. And, there might be a name of an organization that sounds fairly generic, like New Yorkers for this important issue, New Yorkers for better education. But, a name like that doesn't tell you very much. And that's why you have to pull back the layers and you have to look at, well, who are the top donors? Who are the people who are contributing to this? And that's what the program does. And the ads themselves require the top donors. So I think this information lets the public and researchers and journalists kind of pull back the layers and better understand what's happening so you can find those connections. How is this group related or not related to the candidate? And it's through that you can make more informed decisions about whether these ads coming from these outside sources are actually maybe not quite as outside as you think they are. The program has expanded the public match to 8-to-1, and then there's the caps have been raised so candidates can spend more money when there are these types of independent expenditures happening, and that helps to work against that, but with limits to the amount, there's no limits on how much can be spent by these outside actors. So that's where transparency becomes the most important tool for voters to be able to understand what are the motives and what are the intents behind these independent expenditures.
Chisun, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why can't we put the same kind of rules around these independent efforts as we do around the way that the candidates raise and spend funds through their own campaigns?
Well, the current U.S. Supreme Court has decided a case, Citizens United, in 2010, that was really the beginning of a series of decisions that essentially tell us we cannot constitutionally limit independent political spending. So a lot rests on something that Rachael flagged, which is this concept of the separation between unlimited independent spending groups and candidates' campaigns. So the Supreme Court said if there's independence, then there isn't a risk of corruption, defining that as sort of old-fashioned bribery. And if it's independent, then it's okay. And I think that view is out of line with what a lot of Americans and New Yorkers would view as undemocratic, outsized influence of private wealth over politics. It shows up in all kinds of ways that are bad for democracy, besides outright corruption, like lining somebody's pockets. But that is currently the law of the land. And until that can be changed right now, public matching funds really are the best tool at regular citizens' disposal to at least raise the floor for getting into the electoral debate, so that candidates and communities who can't play in the big super PAC realm can still get into the game, have their viewpoints heard, compete for support, and compete for a chance to influence policy. There's been enormous talk and attention about super PACs in the mayoral race, and rightly so. But I'm concerned that also overshadows the story of what the public financing system is doing for down ticket, down ballot races, where we see women candidates in particular for city council relying more than others on small donor money from New Yorkers. And that is the case when you look at campaign fundraising across the country, that women candidates and candidates of colors tend to have to rely more on small donations for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And we have a system that works for candidates who want to raise their support or have to raise their support in that way. While the law of the land still says super PACs, if they follow the technical rules of independence and they comply with transparency rules, they have to be allowed to exist.
I really appreciate, though, you raising up the point of kind of women candidates really getting further running campaigns based on small dollar contributions and matching funds. You know, we've got you know, gender equity at the city council level has been a big issue here in New York City. I think fewer than a quarter of the 51 seats in the city council currently are represented by women. It's an area where we really could do better. We haven't had a woman serve as mayor of New York City. We've got 3 who are part of those that group of 7 candidates I mentioned earlier who have been helped by the matching funds program. And so again, we've got barely a week and a half left before we start to see some results. So a lot of good stuff happening. Rachael, so we talked a bit about independent spending and kind of how it might be a threat to the matching fund system. Are there other threats out there to the continued strength of the program that you see? You know, the program has been, you know, pretty resilient over the years as it's grown and responded to changes in the political environment. Can you talk a little bit about how the structure of the program provides the ability to plan for and address the next set of challenges, whatever they might be?
Absolutely. I think one thing that, having watched the program grow over the last, decade or so myself, is that, and being an advocate and helping to make those changes happen, is that every 4 years, after the election happens, there's a really in-depth report that comes out that the Campaign Finance Board produces that digs into the data, looks at who's making the contributions, looks at how the candidates are spending the money, what the independent spending looks like, and taking that all together and really being self-reflective about how is this program working? Is it working in the best interests of New Yorkers? And, there's a deliberative process where members of the public can come in and make comments and testify and make recommendations about improving the program. And that's been the way that the City Council has been updating the law over the years. And, we also saw some changes happen through the city charter through, ballot campaign that the voters got to vote on. And I think one issue I followed in particular that was something that we looked at was, those who do business with the city, lobbyists and people who are looking for contracts, and the issue of, a lobbyist who might bundle contributions for a candidate who's running for office, and how that might kind of, while they might be limited in how much they can give, if they bundle a bunch of contributions from somebody else, is that a way of kind of short-circuiting the system? And I think that the law has been updated to reflect that, you can't match those contributions anymore with a public match, because they're really not, a small donor if they're coming from a lobbyist. So that's, a change that I think was important that was made in terms of how to reduce the influence of people who are doing business with the city or who are lobbyists. And that's a great example, in my opinion, of how the self-reflection and updates to the system every 4 years, and really looking and continuous improvement of the program is a really strong emphasis that keeps the New York City program strong.
So we're getting close to the end of our time, but Chisun, I think before we finish, I think we've talked a bit about, the structure of the program and at some length about how candidates can benefit. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, this is about how it benefits the voters, right?
That's absolutely true. And I think we've seen, certainly last year and continuing to this year, something of a crisis of a faith in democracy that is sweeping the country. And those of us in a situation to lift up reforms and solutions that not only make people feel that they have the power to be heard in their political process, but actually amplify their ability to be heard in their own political process. These things are vital. It may feel like we're just one city in a country and this may be one program, but these are solutions that people elsewhere look at. People in Congress right now are looking and wrestling over how can they bring a version of public financing to congressional elections so other parts of the country can feel this ownership over their political process. And that is vital. This is not vital just for candidates. It's vital for us, our neighbors, our communities, to not only feel heard and a part of it, but actually really have ownership in the decisions that our political process makes going forward.
Very well put. Rachael, any thoughts to leave us out on?
I think this is really important discussion about how this program is really benefiting voters, and how it's important to look at this race as not just something that we're experiencing, but something we can learn from as well. And I think that the lessons coming out of this election and how the program's working will hopefully be a part of the CFB's next report about how the 2021 elections went. And, we look forward to kind of the continual improvement and making sure that this is working the best for voters as it can.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, it is time for us to wrap up, and I really appreciate this discussion we had. I want to thank my guests, Chisun Lee of the Brennan Center, and Rachael Fauss of Reinvent Albany. Before we go, I have a few reminders for the viewing audience. By the time you're seeing this program, early voting has started. So if you're registered in a party with the primary election, make your voting plan. You may have received our NYC Votes voter guide in the mail. Give it a read to learn more about the candidates. Please visit voting.nyc, where you can find our online voter guide. Make sure you know the details of ranked choice voting, practice filling out your ballot, find your poll site, and get everything you need to know to vote with confidence in this critical primary election. So on behalf of all the residents of Manhattan, of New York City, we appreciate your time. Thank you guys for being here with us. And thank you to the viewers for watching Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Bye.